Step 2 of our grid portrait. In the last step, we gridded out our portrait 1 inch by 1 inch, and then we gridded out our large sheet of paper 2 inch by 2 inch squares. So now I need to count how many squares I have going vertical and how many I have going horizontal. And if you remember from the first step, I had this little extra. It's not a full inch. I'm not going to even bother counting that square. I'm just not going to do this section. So I'm starting, I'll do it over here so you guys can kind of see what I'm doing. I'm going to number it from left to right. So my first box is 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So I have 7 columns on my grid. So 7 1 inch by 1 inch squares going left to right. So on my large sheet of paper, I want to make sure that I have 7 that go along the horizontal. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. So I actually have 2 extra columns that I don't need. So I'm just going to X those off. I know I'm not going to use this row or this column, this column or this column. So again, just to double check, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 columns. I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 columns. And then I want to look at the verticals or the rows, the horizontals, not the verticals. So this, again, this top row on my photograph is not a full inch. So it's not going to equal my 2 by inch square up here. So I'm just not even going to bother doing that. That was the extra not full inch square at the top of my photograph. So now I'm going to number my rows going up. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. So I have 10 rows going up. So now I want to make sure that I have 10 rows on my large sheet of paper. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. And I have 2 extra. So again, I'm not going to use those. So I'm going to mark it so I know that I'm not counting those rows. You can cut that off completely if you wanted to. Just take a scissors and get rid of this extra stuff so it doesn't get confusing. Just for time's sake, I'm not going to do that. I'm just going to make sure I mark it so I know not to go into those rows and columns. So my finished piece is actually going to be this size. All right, so we have 10 rows, 7 columns. So the first step I'm going to do, and I kind of already started doing this on another one, what you're going to do is take your first square, and again, in my photograph, you can see I'm not going to use this bottom row because it's not a full inch. So again, I could cut it off or fold it or just ignore it. But my squares are starting there. So this is my 1 by 1 square here. So my first square in my bottom corner is going to be this one. One way to make it easier for yourself is to create a 1 inch by 1 inch kind of like view guide, and you can place it over the square that you're working on. So I know that this is my first square that I am going to be drawing in my first square down here. Okay? So this one's a little bit different than the last one I just showed you. So I'm just gonna darken this up so you guys can see. This is my first square right here. I already kind of started drawing it in. I don't know if you can see that very well, but I started drawing the fingers in. And what I'm doing is square by square, I'm just looking at one little bit of information and translating that onto my paper. And when I'm done with that, I'm going to scoot over to the next row. So carefully matching it up with the markings on my paper. Make sure I've got that 1 by 1 inch. And I started drawing in. I saw that this piece of fabric back here where her shirt starts is not quite halfway up the square. It's a little bit lower. So over here, I looked, saw this was halfway, and I maybe should have brought it up a little higher. And then drew in her thumb. And just looking for connections. So over here, again, halfway across this square is about here, right? But her sweater doesn't go quite that far. It kind of ends here. So then I went here. It's not quite that far, so I kind of brought it down. So this square equals this square. Over here, this is all black, so there's not a whole lot of detail for me to draw. And that's black, and that's black, that's black. Here, when I start doing shading and texture, I don't know if you guys can see that very well in the camera, but there's a little bit of texture in the photograph, which you really can't see. But I'll get to that when I start doing texture and shading toward the end after the whole drawing is done. So now I know I need to, like, this whole row here is black. I don't really need to draw anything in that spot. So now I'm going to come back over here. So now I'm in my second row. See, there's 2 and 2. It's not a whole lot to draw on this square, but this square has just a little bit in the corner. So if I want to use my guide, I can line that up with my lines on my page. And I can see again, so if this is halfway, the sweater does not start halfway. It's a little bit under. So I skipped this box. I'm over here. I started, and I can tell it matched up with my first box. So I started here and brought it up to about there. Now over here, my next box over, it seems as though this kind of jumps up. You can see here the line here kind of connects. And if you ever need to kind of double check, you can always just pull it away. So I'm going from this box to this box. So if something doesn't make sense, you can always pull your view guide away because this actually lines up with this. So I'm going to bring that part of the sweater up. This goes a little under halfway. And then there's some texture that comes down. Again, I'm just going to draw some lines in there just to give me some guide for when I add the texture. And then these boxes are black. This one's black. This next one over has some of this texture in here. So again, kind of just drawing in where I see texture, where I see lines. And there's a little bit of something going on over here too. And then over here, so I just keep moving along, looking at my squares, and I keep adding. That line is pretty light, but you can see I started adding those lines. So you're really going inch by inch and translating the information that is in this 1 inch square onto the corresponding 2 by 2 inch square on your large piece of paper. So if I was looking for something like her eye, if I wanted to work on her eye, I could go to box 6 and 1, 2, 3, 3 columns over, 1, 2, 3, up to 6. So her eye is going to be here. This is where her eye is going to start. And so I could, if I wanted to jump around on the page, start drawing in, like here's her eyebrow. Her nose kind of comes down. So this is kind of like you have to really concentrate on where is this landing. Her cheek right here is like almost dead center on that square. So that's going to come up and kind of curve in. So that's where you'd start concentrating on that. I recommend following your rows so that if you are confused about, where does this line up with this one, you can make that connection. If I went from here up to here and then try to reconnect it, it might not make sense. So I would start just going across one row and then starting another row so that you have something to go back on to kind of connect those lines so they don't get all kind of jostled up. So that is essentially the first or the second step to the grid drawing. So you're going to do that all the way up your page, all the way up your photograph until you have a full line drawing.